again, to help me establish the thesis that software networks, which are so large and important for society that they're public goods, are best structured as open source token networks and not as for-profit corporations. Blockchains are actually a simple technology. They're just a database. But anyone can download a copy and participate, and the participants agree on how entries are added to the database. Additionally, the entire system is open and transparent to be inspected and verified by anyone. This is important because the result is trust. The verifiability of the system establishes trust that the system undeniably does what it says it does, and the consensus about the information in the database establishes trust in an unquestionable truth. And to get a sense of how important trust is for society, 35% of US employment is to establish trust. Attorneys, law enforcement, auditors, etc. If you were to extrapolate that to global GDP, you get a somewhat imperfect but still meaningful number of a $28 trillion opportunity. And we think the market for trust is up for grabs. Trust in government is at historic lows. Trust in media plunged to all-time lows. Trust in NGOs and business is declining. Only 15% of citizens globally believe that the current system is working. And if you think about trust, trust is omnipresent and intangible, and it affects almost every aspect of society and commerce. Imagine how much blind trust is assumed just in everyday traffic light crossing. You trust your life that the traffic light itself works. You trust that 30 other people around you obey and use the system in exactly the way it's expected. And if one of them doesn't, you get run over by the FedEx truck. Now imagine how much trust is involved when you eat food in a restaurant. That the regulations and enforcement of the supply chain are working, that the regulations and enforcement of the hygienic standards of the restaurant are in place. And it can go beyond food poisoning. Remember how badly things go when trust in the financial system breaks down. The world economy was on the brink of collapse. And you can see what happens when trust in a government breaks down, as we witnessed in Venezuela, Hong Kong, and Chile. Now, because trust is so omnipresent yet intangible, and the feature of blockchains is trust, there are seemingly limitless applications and outcomes from applying blockchain technology to a number of different industries, which also means there's a lot of confusion. You've probably noticed that blockchain means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In the following slides, I'll outline a few of the themes in crypto, and I'll go into a bit of depth afterwards with sector examples where public good token networks seem to be involving morale. The purpose is less to share, but to back the whole thesis up with real-world examples. Do keep in mind, though, that the investments of ours. One of the themes of crypto is the Internet of Value. The value of money is based on trust. And since we now have systems that can create trust, they can create money. On top of that, these types of new money are now programmable and connected in an Internet of Value. That also means that we can now program incentives. And as an example of how powerful an effect incentives can have, one of the biggest innovations in human history was the limited liability corporation, which redefined incentives. So when I start a business, I now reduce the risk to my investment only, and angry customers can't take my house anymore. And that subtle change in incentives changed how the world worked. The dominant form of organization in the world today is a limited liability company. And so now we can program incentives and therefore desired behavior into a network. This is very powerful because it has enabled the biggest business model innovation for networks since the beginning of the limited liability corporation. And to take a step back, we actually think that the incentive structure of a for-profit company is fundamentally flawed. So take Uber, for example. Their main goal is to charge me as a passenger as much as possible, while paying the drivers as little as possible. Sorry about that. I hope this doesn't go off soon. So Uber, for example, their main goal is to charge me as a passenger as much as possible while paying the driver as little as possible. The incentives of the stakeholders are directly opposed. In contrast, Oh my God, there's a fire alarm right now. This is, so it says a fire alarm. It's a drill. I will try to continue. If the noise and the alarms keep going, I'm very sorry. I think we might have to cut off. I'll just keep going for now. So in contrast, these crypto networks establish a nonprofit foundation instead of a for-profit company. And access to the use of the network as a customer, or the right to work as a supplier, is represented in a digital token, which itself is also an investable and tradable asset. So the value of the network is shared indirectly with all stakeholders instead of value extracting fees that benefit only the selected few owners of company shares. And this business model has the potential to be better than free, because a token might appreciate in value if the demand for the utility of the network increases. So it just said that the fire alarm has concluded the test, so I think we're good. Sorry about that. So let me start with this slide, just to back up again. So in contrast of companies, these crypto networks establish a non-profit foundation instead of a for-profit company. Access to the use of the network as a customer, or the right to work as a supplier, is represented in a digital token, which itself is also an investable and tradable asset. So the value of the network is shared indirectly with all stakeholders instead of value extracting fees that benefit only the selected few owners of company shares. And this business model has the potential to be better than free, because the token might appreciate in value if the demand for the utility of the network increases, and grants voting rights and therefore sovereignty over important decisions that could have serious consequences for the stakeholders. So it's worth emphasizing that these public good crypto networks are not companies. And we actually have statements from the SEC and other regulatory agencies that they understand and acknowledge this concept of decentralized networks. So it's not just a crypto bubble talking here. This new token business model allows these networks or protocols to have no need for a proprietary asset. In fact, in order to create the required trust for the network, the asset/code base actually needs to be open source, transparent, and inspectable. That also means that it is built once and reused by thousands, because anybody can take open source code and copy it for their own use. Imagine anyone could have taken Uber's technology from day one, innovated on it, and it created 1,000 other transportation networks. Every village in the world would have its own ride-sharing service without Uber and Lyft taking billions a year out of the system. This is why we've seen innovation occurring at a speed in crypto unlike anything before. In the legacy economy, just think about how many companies are currently working in parallel on duplicate products and technologies behind closed doors, competing and even sabotaging each other. What a waste of resources. Again, in crypto, it's built once, and then anybody else can reuse it, learn from it, and innovate on it. And now I'd like to go into some more specific sectors that are starting to emerge within crypto. So with open finance, also called DeFi, we're seeing the emergence of a frictionless global financial ecosystem with near zero transaction costs, open source financial instruments, and zero intermediary fees. This financial system grew extremely quickly to over $1 billion in value. It's an example of the explosive growth these networks can have. Popular applications are Maker, which is a decentralized central bank that lets you print a stable coin from your collateral, Compound, which is a money market, and FutureSwap, which is a futures exchange. Again, these are open source and therefore trusted, with minimal fees, but instead indirectly financed by utility tokens. DeFi even has its own mutual insurance, which allows you to buy cover against the technology risk of the above financial protocols. Nexus Mutual is also an open source, minimal fee network where the value accrues entirely to the participants via the token. All the funds are held transparently on the blockchain, and claim assessment and payouts are also public for everyone to inspect. Another very promising sector is called Web3. So decentralization is not just a buzzword. It's a means to an end: security and sovereignty. Software is eating the world and becoming ever more important. For large-scale software networks of such high public importance that they're public goods, the classical vertical corporation isn't suited anymore because of two reasons. One, the complexity. Vertical organizations have a limit of software complexity they can handle. You can see, for example, with Equifax, that after a certain size, some very serious mistakes are bound to happen. And two, the incentives. A for-profit company ultimately just wants to sell the cheapest things for the highest price in the quickest way. And in the specific case of Boeing, they try to beat Airbus to the market while outsourcing the critical software functionality to temporary developers as a cost-cutting tactic, which is directly attributed to the fatal crashes. More specifically, Web3 enables protocol marketplaces to replace monolithic service providers like AWS and Microsoft Cloud. Instead of a company, an open source, keyless protocol coordinates the supply of computing and data storage resources. What is very exciting about this is the perfect competition and innovation that is enabled on the supply side. Anybody can become a supplier within hours. There are no negotiations and agreements to sign. Transaction costs are near zero, and since all the rules and possible behaviors are encoded in the protocol, no trust costs are incurred for monitoring and enforcing against malicious behavior. And we have one market already where we saw this result in an unprecedented innovation surge, with Bitcoin mining. The global competition for proof-of-work computation that is open for anyone in the world to participate and innovate on has increased the mining efficiency 130-fold in only 6 years. And this is from the beginning of ASICs. It doesn't include improvements starting with CPUs. We expect this open and permissionless innovation on the supply side to become a game changer for cloud computing and for Web3 protocols to completely disrupt and disintermediate the market. We've taken two investments within Web3 via one, Arif. Arif is a protocol that coordinates stakeholders with hard drive capacity with parties who need cheap, immutable storage. For a few cents, you can today upload a website or web app and have it hosted for 200 years without ever having to pay again, do any server maintenance, or face any downtime. And the second one is Fluence. The Fluence protocol organizes a peer-to-peer network of storage and computing providers into an open source cloud. First simulations predicted to be up to 7 times cheaper than AWS, but again, we estimate the reality will be beyond our expectations if the project manages to foster an ecosystem of providers and supply-side innovation as happened with proof-of-work money. Another interesting sector is payments. It is estimated that the total social costs of payments are 2% of US GDP, which is $500 billion a year in America alone. And that's because the credit card networks are a very outdated technology. Starting in the 50s, they involved 11 different parties in every transaction. Interesting to point out here is that Stripe and Square, which are both billion-dollar companies, are actually only one of those 11 parties. And this is what the payment industry looks like with Flexa. It uses cryptocurrencies as a payment technology to remove all of these intermediaries while reducing the cost of point-of-sale payments down to 1% with next-day payment to the merchant. And the merchant doesn't need any new hardware, nor new software, nor any employee training. Terra takes a similar approach for e-commerce payments in Asia. Blockchain technology is used to reduce payment costs down to 10 basis points with a cap of $1 and next-day settlement. It's already one of the most used blockchains in existence with 1.2 million users and over $620 million in transaction volume in 8 months. So as you can see, blockchain is a simple technology but with profound implications for many different industries. On top of that complexity, it is also a financial system estimated to be 25 times faster than the legacy financial system, with a volatility that makes a natural gas day trader dizzy. So how do we navigate this space as an investor? We felt that we needed a simple yet strong thesis that would give us the flexibility for this fast-changing space, but also strong conviction when the markets temporarily turn against us. And the best way to summarize our thesis is that we're token maximalists. We just have a hard time seeing how for-profit companies are going to compete with open source token networks. And the short way to put that is, imagine Bitcoin or Ethereum had been private companies. Nobody would have cared. Here are three specific advantages we see that these public good crypto networks have over for-profit corporations. Number one, better than free. As explained before, the use/work token converts me to a stakeholder instead of just a customer supplier, with an incentive-aligned cheapest use of the network, potential financial benefit, and a sense of sovereignty through governance participation. Permissionless innovation. Since there are no gatekeepers and anybody can innovate on top of the network without asking for permission, a wealth of experiments is carried out that no permission systems can compete with in numbers. And innovation is a numbers game. The more experiments, the likelier a killer use case is discovered. For example, for every 10,000 apps in the App Store, one is successful. And number three, trust. If you want to build a large network, you need buy-in from many different parties. Users, suppliers, regulators, the media. With trust in business declining, it is much easier for these decentralized networks to gather the buy-in from a diverse set of stakeholders. You can see the counterexample of how aggressively the regulators stepped in against Facebook the second they announced their global coin. I was actually surprised how many politicians understood the difference between a decentralized network and a corporate network like Nida. So I hope I was able to drop some good points supporting our thesis that software networks that are so large and important for society, that they're essentially public goods, are better structured as open source token networks where the incentives of all stakeholders are aligned versus for-profit corporations that extract all the value to only selected few and ultimately always end up in a company versus customer and supplier dynamic. Thank you very much for your time.